Thanks so much, Melissa. Hi, everyone. I'm very happy to be with you to moderate this session about Untapped Reserves 2.0, driving gender balance in oil and gas. Before I introduce the topic and the panelists, just wanted to share with you a couple of things from my experience. When I started 12 years ago working for a major oil and gas company, actually, I realized that I was the only woman in the room at about 80% of the meetings. Now, this has changed, but the question is, what was the baseline in our industry? And how do we quantify this change? What did the companies implement to drive this change? These are the key questions at the core of the partnership in between the Boston Consulting Group and the World Petroleum Council. And the two organizations decided back in 2017 to launch the first ever survey dedicated to gender diversity in oil and gas, conducting to develop the first baseline for our industry. I suggest we watch a very quick video about this partnership first.
Innovation will be really critical to win in the 20s. There will be more change, unprecedented change, in the next decade. And I believe diversity is absolutely key.
Well, the other area that's obviously important to us as well is diversity. And in diversity, we're looking specifically at engaging more women in the oil and gas sector. There are currently only 22% of the employees are female.
Now I would like to introduce our panelists. We're very lucky to have a diverse group with us, starting actually with the representative of diversity, Pedro Mira Salamanca, the only male in this virtual room, proving that it's just about a shift in perspectives. So Pedro, you're actually the sectorial organizations director at Repsol. You are a senior VP of the World Petroleum Council, leading the Spanish committee. Your technical skills and capabilities are fully proven. You are part of a very impressive number of boards, including in biofuels. We also have the pleasure to welcome with us today Reem Al-Ghanim. Reem, you are the head of HR support services in Saudi Aramco Chemicals business. You have a plus 20-year career in HR, leading very, very key topics actually in this field, including mobility, career planning, and of course, diversity. You were actually a pioneer in the topic in your region, being a founding member of LIWAS, the Leadership Excellence for Women Award Symposium. And the very last edition just happened and was, again, another major success. So congratulations to you. Shelley Trench. So Shelley, you are a managing director and partner with the Boston Consulting Group. You are leading major transformations and you also specialized in topics like innovation, new energies, and as well diversity. You actually started your career in the field, being a petroleum engineer, so you know very well what we're talking about, and your path took you across continents, in between the US, in between Asia, Middle East. You are now based in Dubai, and you were part of the two first female elected partner at BCG Middle East. and Ulrike von Lonsky. So Ulrike, you are the Chief Operating Officer of the World Petroleum Council. You are the Deputy of the Director General, and you were very much involved in pushing with the World Petroleum Council new topics like young leaders in oil and gas over the last 10 years with major outcomes out of these initiatives. You are clearly a change leader, and now you are concentrating your energy in driving gender balance in oil and gas. So we'd like to actually start and remind everyone of the two key takeaways of the 2017 report that was published, Untapped Reserves. And I would like to actually mention those figures. So first of all, about 20% of women in oil and gas, which is obviously very low if you compare it to other sectors, like for instance, construction and agriculture. There are 10 points in percentage higher than that, because apparently 30% of women are in the workforce for these sectors. It's only construction that is under oil and gas, with about 10% of women in the workforce. That's the key fact number one. Number two, there is a very noticeable drop in the share of women in companies at mid-career. And this is key because this is right before they go into senior positions, into leadership positions. And here we have a drop of 5 to 15% in women, be it in technical functions or business support functions. Now, I'd like to open to the panelists, starting with Rim. Do these facts and figures resonate with your own experience? And what surprised you the most when you read the report the first time? And how did you use it in your role?
Thank you, Claire. It's a pleasure to be here. Absolutely, the facts and figures did resonate. I had the absolute pleasure of working with Ulrike on the report in 2017 and with BCG as well. And another fascinating figure was the difference between when the CEO or senior leadership see gender diversity as important, then the rest of the management team and men in the organization see that as important, and it goes up to 86%. When the senior leadership see it as unimportant, it goes down to 34%. And so what a huge difference the message from the top makes in ensuring that we have diverse organizations and a focus on inclusion as well. And we saw that at Saudi Aramco with our president and CEO in 2016, signing the call to action. We saw that in how our senior leaders are driving our diversity and inclusion strategy, which BCG helped us establish just last year. And we have very ambitious targets, and these targets are directly linked with our 2030 vision, and are targets that are not going to be easy. They are challenging targets, but we've built a foundation that supports the enablement of these targets, whether that's in the sponsored student program, which we started in 2006, 2007, sponsoring women to earn degrees in the different disciplines that we need as a company in petroleum engineering, geology, geophysics, and chemical engineering, and in other ways to support the buildup of the female pipeline.
And Shelly, I'm curious, because you are actually on the consulting side, advising these leaders. Do you observe the same thing? Is it like about putting this in the CEO agenda?
The CEO agenda, and I would say the full top leadership agenda, definitely is very important. And you saw it in the report in the way that senior management, there was a high relation between senior management perspective and whether diversity was important if the CEO was leading in terms of diversity overall. So yes, we see the same thing. And I think when we consult to companies globally, it's not only about the communication and the change management that we are expecting to see consistently from CEOs. And when I say we, I'm representing the employee base and the base of women within companies. But I think it's also about CEOs and leadership teams championing key programs such as sponsorship programs, which allow women to have I think a smoother path to the top, and being very clear about what the ambition is for diversity broadly and gender diversity within companies. Now, we're not saying that there needs to be targets across all of these companies, but stating an ambition, putting the resources behind that ambition, I think is the most powerful thing that we can see CEOs do consistently. Because what I have seen is that we need to have that intersection of a CEO that is committed and visible on diversity, and the resources and the initiatives and the programs that allow us to push the structural shift in diversity that is needed.
And actually, it's a perfect segue to ask Ulrike about when the report was published. What did the companies think about it? How did they leverage on the report, to Shelley's point, to go a step beyond in driving gender balance in oil and gas?
I think when the report was originally published, it actually filled a gap, because there wasn't really anything out there that provided some background data on what the issue for women in the industry was. So it allowed companies to benchmark. It allowed them to actually use some of the outcomes that we've seen. And I totally agree that the CEO impact, the importance of leading from the top, is one of the most critical ones. There were a lot of things in the report that I think we already knew about, but now we have the data to support it. The other big area that I saw in there was the still very large impact of unconscious bias. I think a lot of people think that they are very supportive of women. The fact is that if you don't do anything about it, if you're not seen to do something about it, it doesn't really go beyond your own impressions. We had a question in there, for example, around flexibility, yeah? And who was more flexible, and what were the perceptions of the people in the survey? And it was seen that women were actually very flexible. Whereas when we were looking at answers to questions, would you be prepared to take a step back to do more studying, take a different role in order to get more experience, go abroad? It was always the women who actually were more willing to take the extra steps, something that I don't think we quite expected to see, but now we have the figures to support it. And I think that is really what helps companies make a change in their own businesses.
That's absolutely true. And the 2020 edition of the survey is going to be very interesting as well, to measure the change and the path accomplished by the industry. So the result will be published next year, but I would like to hear from you, starting with Reem. What has changed already, to your point of view? What do you see as emerging trends driving further gender diversity?
Well, so I'm reflecting back at the last week with LIWAS, and we celebrated the winners of the Leadership Excellence for Women Awards. The applications, I would say 80% of the applications we received for the different awards, and the awards spanned from student to university professor to young professional, mid-career, and senior woman, and a male champion award, and also an organization award. But 80% of the applications we received were for Rising Star, the Young Professional Award, and the Leading with Excellence Award for women, and which is a mid-career award. And that tells me we have a bit more women in the foundation, right, and the beginning years of employment, but a lot less in the senior years, and more experienced women, women with more than 15 years of experience. We also noticed that I think in not only in the region, but the need for focus on vocational training. We obviously, our industry requires people with vocational training. We unfortunately don't have enough women with that experience, expertise, and education. And that's another opportunity to work with colleges, vocational colleges and universities to increase those opportunities for women as well.
And Shelley, based on what you observe in different companies across regions, would you see as well like new opportunities, especially in the mid-career for women, new job opportunities?
Definitely. So let me first start by saying that there is a shift, and the energy transition, as I see it, is not only about the shift towards a low emission economy, but it's also about the shift that comes with the diversity, with technology, and a number of other things. And I think that fundamental shift is creating opportunities, specifically as we look for more data architects, data engineers, platform engineers, as we look for more renewable engineers. When I walk into rooms today, I will say, you know, I did a cybersecurity project with a client in the region globally, and about 80% of the people in the room were women. And I was pleasantly shocked as I walked into the room. I honestly thought I was in the wrong place, but I think this to me is representative of the shift that we're seeing and the opportunities that are being embraced. And that embracing of those opportunities is, as Reem was saying, is that there is a training or a skilling and a reskilling of the population, and in particular the female population is very open to that and is grabbing those opportunities overall. So I think that combination of reskilling, upskilling, new talent, and new female and diverse talent coming into the industry, coupled with the fact that we now have more female role models at the top. So, you know, when we look at people like Vicky Halub, when we look at Mary Francis, when we look at Fatma Al-Naimi right here in the Middle East, I think the bottom up that we have and this sort of top down of role models for us is causing a paradigm shift. Now, for me, the question is going to be what Ulrike spoke to earlier, which is inclusivity, because now that women are being invited to the table, and when I speak about women, but I really think that diversity cannot be accomplished unless we embrace all diverse groups. So now that diverse groups are being invited to the table, can we really change the norms and behaviors to give a fair share of voice? And I think that's the question that I would want to open up also.
I think, Ulrike, maybe you want to comment on this one, but as well, you've been with the World Petroleum Council meeting so many companies across the world, and since you published the report in 2017, what are the changes you already observed, and as well, what gives you hope in this change that you are driving with the World Petroleum Council at the industry level?
Well, I'm very pleased to say that we've actually seen a lot of change. When we started the survey in 2016, and we reached out to companies to ask them to share their data, we only got 38 companies to participate. Now, luckily, those were the really big companies, so they represented a large proportion of the employees in the oil and gas sector. But nowadays, when I speak about gender issues, when we talk about diversity, we can see that it's moved much higher up on the CEO's agenda and on the company agenda. So nowadays, we see a lot more participation from companies in that. So we definitely hope that this will also reflect in the next survey so that we get more companies to be part of it, share their data, and allow a better benchmarking for everybody so that we can then look at the numbers over a longer period of time and see what is moving and where are we going. But I think that we're going in the right direction.
That's really good to hear. And I'm sure that all the participants to this conference are very pleased to hear that. And I guess the next report as well is going to really take a stab at regional differences, doing a double click on understanding what are the levers of change and what we can do concretely. And Pedro, I think that we had a question for you as well.
Okay.
You had a very long career, an ongoing career, so you've seen a lot of change in the industry. What was the major changes you observed in the gender diversity topic since you started your career in oil and gas?
Well, I think the changes are just now. I have been working for 30 years in the oil and gas, and I am quite surprised of how bad are the figures for the diversity in this field, no? And but I have been very lucky because it's not my case. I've been working for all my life with much more ladies than men. It's something that is quite unusual, and I think it's starting to change now. I think now, due to flexibility, that is for me the key question for this. It's much more easy for women to start to have a good career, because the problem was exactly with lack of flexibility. Very the way to work in the past was very tight, very difficult to manage many things at the same time. This is but this is starting to change. It's my feeling.
And how do you see the current COVID crisis? Because this is obviously impacting a lot our industry, economically speaking. We know that these are unprecedented times, but as well, it impacted a lot our ways of working. So you mentioned flexibility. Now everyone was forced into remote working, to adopt as well digital tools, etc. So how do you see the impact of the COVID crisis on gender diversity in oil and gas, Pedro?
Well, COVID is a terrible problem, and it's something very bad for everyone. But just in this special point, it's helping. It's helping a lot, because many people have realized that the key question is not to be in the office. It's not a question to be in the office. It's a question to do your work, and you can do your work in different ways. So as everyone has to go home and to work in a remote system, we have proof that it's possible to give flexibility to people to adapt their own personal situation and to be very good in your own work. So COVID is a terrible disaster. It's a terrible for many things, but in this point has been a good proof that it's possible to give more flexibility to people.
Seeing the opportunity, the difficulty, I guess, to quote Churchill. And then, Rim, is it something that you observe as well, because you are leading the HR of a very operational branch with sites, with factories, etc., and plants. So is it something that helps you redefining your own operating model and hoping to increase the portion of women, because maybe they will have less the constraints of being on site less often, actually?
Well, I mean, that's an interesting point, Claudia. Claire, sorry. I would say that obviously the shift almost overnight to remote work happened, and it was very unusual for a company like Saudi Aramco, which is and always has been a very office-based and work-based. We've learned a lot, we've grown a lot over the last few months, and more than anything, I think the company and myself have realized that it's the employee well-being that's most important. And this is something that it didn't, and even as we are looking at and have been monitoring and looking after employee well-being, the people that have been reminding us of what's important were the people from diverse backgrounds. And so whether that is looking at mental health, whether that is looking at physical needs, whether that's ensuring that people have the right devices and able to produce, or in fact, my boss, because he knows me very well, knows that if I start working, I could possibly not stop working. And very early on at the start of the pandemic reminded me, Reem, you have to take a break. Reem, you have to, don't work on the weekend. You have to stop working. I want you to enjoy the weekend. And I really appreciated that from him. And that's the kind of inclusive leadership that we are continue to try and build in the company, and which I hope that all organizations have, whether in the industry or not, because what people have gone through during the pandemic hasn't been easy, whether it hit them directly in their direct family, or people they know, or themselves. But I would say well-being and the fact that we can look at diverse needs was very, very important.
And Shelley, from an external point of view, looking at different companies, did you observe as well this, like, let's hear the voice of our employees more often than before, having as well the transparent dialogue with leadership that Reem was mentioning right now? Is it something that emerged in your experience over the last couple of months?
Definitely, yes. And I would say of all the companies that I interact with, maybe there are one or two where I have not seen an intense step up in two-way employee engagement surveys, focus groups, outreach, mental health, well-being support is something that most companies have put out. And there's, very interestingly for BCG and for myself, as I look across, because I support multiple HR organizations, we have seen that employee engagement surveys in this year has actually come back stronger than the last 3 to 5 years, because many companies, and especially energy companies, where we have a large percentage of industrial staff, are doubling down on the support that we give to employees and actually going back to purpose-led statements and purpose-led leadership, which really gets to the hearts of supporting and mobilizing employees overall. So I would say simple answers: yes, Claire, we are indeed seeing an increase in two-way communication with employees overall. What I will say is that the way that that engagement is happening is changing over time, and especially within the COVID environment. So we're transitioning from an environment where we would do an employee or engagement survey once a year to where I'm seeing companies doing this on a more ongoing basis through either monthly surveys, or the more sophisticated companies that are essentially having pulse checks through apps on a consistent basis, through the focus groups, through online coffee chats. And because we've all accepted, you know, Skype and Zoom and Microsoft Teams, these engagements are happening more frequently across multiple levels of the organization overall. And I think that opening up of dialogue is very powerful for everyone, because it also is beginning to break, in my opinion, a bit of the barriers, I would say socio-political barriers that we sometimes see in companies that we know have in the past contributed to the unconscious bias. And I think women are now able to, through these means, have a greater share of voice by being more present in more forums with time.
And Enrique, I'm curious, because when you launched the first report back in 2017, the context was very different. So how are you integrating now in your new survey the impact of the COVID crisis? What are the topics that you're going to look at when you survey both companies and individuals of the oil and gas industry?
Very interesting. So absolutely. I mean, the pandemic is ruling everything. It's had a huge impact on the oil and gas sector. I think the oil price has seen a low that we've never seen before. That means that there will be, even going forward, more impacts on employees in the oil and gas sector. So on the one hand, a positive, you know, working from home, putting everybody on the same level. On the other hand, we're seeing that, you know, companies have to downsize and make redundancies. So we're very much interested in how that is going to impact on women in the oil and gas sector. So we're asking that both on our quantitative survey, where we're going to the companies and asking them for the numbers, and we're doing that when we're asking for the people's views. You know, what is the actual perspective from the people working in this sector? So I think we're going to be seeing that some of it is positive, but the impacts of having the children at home, not knowing what's going to happen, there is going to be some negative impacts as well. So how to deal with that and what companies are doing around that, those are some of the issues that we're hoping to address with the survey that's being launched in a few weeks.
And Pedro, you were actually the first supporter of the 2017 edition. You really wanted this to happen, to create this baseline we talked about earlier for our industry and see where we are starting from in terms of gender diversity. What makes you excited about this upcoming report? What are the key questions you have in mind for this new edition?
Well, what I'm really excited is to be the evolution. And when we were working in the design of this first report, we had a very clear idea, is that a photograph is only a photograph. We can have good or bad figures, but it's important to understand what has happened in the last 3 years. So we can include some new questions or some new approaches. But for me, the key is to continue with the same questions, at least, in order to know if something has evolved, because we can have some surprise that figures become worse. Hopefully not, but could be worse. And this is, for me, the key question, to continue with the same questions, to continue tracking what is happening with this very, very important issue. And of course, we can include something new or new approaches. I think it's very important to speak about flexibility, and this is very, very important in order to help help women and to have more possibilities to go at the top level of the companies, because the problem is not the lack of flexibility. So I will try to be much more intensive in this kind of questions.
No, it does make sense. And I think in this particular environment of ours, I'd like to hear as well from the panelists, because you are a very diverse group of people coming from different backgrounds, living in different continents. And I'm sure the audience is going to love to hear a bit of your personal perspective. What are actually your views on the future outlook for gender diversity and in oil and gas? And maybe starting with you, Shelley. What is the future outlook? What are your personal views on this?
The outlook is positive. That's my view. I've been in the industry now for over 2 decades, and I would say I've probably seen more change in the last 12 months than I've seen in the last 2 decades. There is this perfect mix for the sector of a fundamental challenge that's causing us to rethink our business model, our way of working, but it's being complemented by a much more active society and a much more active employee base. And I think as a result of that, as an industry and as a leadership within the industry, we're embracing that to evolve in a way that's very positive for diversity and in the way that we appreciate inclusion overall. And as we think about the structural changes that are needed in industry, and those new ways of working, the new ways of working, yes, fundamentally we're looking for, between 20 and 40% cost reduction. We have process optimization, centralization of services. There is all of that fantastic stuff that is happening as we look to sustain ourselves over the long term. But what I've seen is that complementing that is a lot of work that's happening in terms of cultural evolution, diversity programs, and I would say other more fundamental programs in the way that we work with each other overall. And to me, that in itself is very, very positive.
And Reem, we heard your very positive views as well on the outcomes of LUAS and what you see. Do you share as well this positive outlook of the future and especially in gender diversity in oil and gas?
Absolutely, Claire. So, I mean, I look at it, we're very fortunate right now. We have, I live in a country that has been, over the last few years, focusing dramatically. We just finished the W20 meetings, and we've focused a lot on gender diversity, not just in oil and gas, but in all sectors. And we have deputy ministers, we have women now in higher leadership roles, and we now see those role models that we were not able to see in the past. And I've also spent a couple of decades, similar to Shelley, in this industry. And I remember the days when I was the only woman in the meeting. I was one of 3 women in the entire department, and now we're seeing in much better percentages and much better representation at all levels. Are we there yet? No. But we're getting there. We're improving every year. We're improving every day. And I think it starts with that feeling of belonging, that inclusive environment, and the leadership team really taking accountability and responsibility for making these changes. And a very, very engaging young female workforce that today are looking up to people like Shelley and myself and Ulrike as role models, and we have to be those role models, and we have to bring them up with us in our industry and in our companies as well.
It does make sense, and I think also we have obviously male role models that are pushing for this, and that's what I've observed, this like male plus female completely convinced of the change to be driven. And Pedro, would like to hear from you as well on this topic. What are your views on the future outlook for gender diversity in oil and gas?
Well, first let me underline that what I'm going to say is my experience. I have been working all my time with much more women than men. Actually, nowadays, the 100% of the people that are working in my first line are women, and in my previous work, around 50%. So I can say very, very, very proud of it. No, and it's not a question of women and men. It's a question of talent. This is very important. We in our industry have a lot of problems, and one of the most important one is that we have not very good perception from the people. People think that we are very, very special industry, and so we need all the talent. And the talent cannot be reduced at the half of the people. we have to include all the people. So the dialogue is not only to include women, is to retain the talent. This is very important in my opinion. And now we have the technology. The technology is helping us a lot. As I said before, okay, the pandemic has been a terrible disaster. It's still being a terrible disaster, but it's helping for this. We have to take advantage of this technology, and we have demonstrated that it's possible to have flexibility to work from home in different hours. No problem with this. So let's speak about talent. Let's speak about technology. So I am very optimistic. I am very, 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 very waiting for the results of the next survey. But the important one is not the next, but the following.
Absolutely. And I think, Ulrike, this is really what you're pushing for as well, and what we're pushing for at BCG, to have this recurrent surveying as well, to really see how we position ourselves as an industry. So you're very busy now with the new edition. Can you tell us a bit more, and maybe also explain to everyone listening to us today how they can participate? Because we heard the messages very clearly. The people now can make their voices heard even more than before with this crisis, having a transparent dialogue. So how do you integrate this in the new edition of the survey, and how can people help you with this?
Well, thank you very much. We're really moving from what we did in the first survey, which was promoting gender balance in oil and gas, to driving it. And to drive it means we need to see what the companies are doing. So the first part of our study is to speak to the companies and get their data, their input on the women in their organization. The second part of it, and that's the one that we're about to launch towards the end of the month, is where we let the people themselves share their views. So that will be a global survey that allows people to sort of comment on a lot of the issues and the challenges that we see for women in oil and gas. Now, this is not just for the women, this is for the men also. So we definitely invite everybody to participate on that. We've created an online hub for that called Untapped Reserves. So it's easy to find us, and we hope that you sign up for it. As a follow-up, we will also be talking to some of the companies about best practices. And we're going to sort of put together a lineup of actions that companies can take, where they can benchmark themselves against and look at where they want to be standing in 10 years, in 15 years down the line. Because the feedback that we got from our last survey is people are very positive about this. We see a big change, and we see it happening faster now than ever in the history of the oil and gas industry before. So let's hope that this will stay regardless of pandemic, regardless of other issues, and that these untapped reserves will no longer be untapped.
So actually, with that, I think it's a perfect way to conclude this panel session. And I'd like to thank you, to thank everyone for your time today. I think the message is very clear. Everyone in our industry, be it at a company level, leader level, individual contributor level, can be an actor or an actress of this change and make your voice heard, and go to untappedreserves.com so you can actually take the survey. Thank you very much, everyone, and looking forward to the questions in the follow-up session.
Thank you, Claire.
Thank you.
Thank
That
you.
was excellent.
Thank you very much.